They say Atlantis fell, but some truths do not sink. They choose to hide, not out of fear, but in reverence. Not out of weakness, but in wisdom, and like a song sung beneath the waves. Their memory hums beneath our skin, soft and ancient, waiting to be remembered, not by the mind, but by the soul. For Atlantis was never truly lost. It simply stepped back, folded itself into the folds of time, wrapped in mist, protected by the forgetting. You feel it sometimes, in the dreams that come before dawn, in the ache for something you can't name, in the colors that shimmer behind your closed eyes. You feel it in the pulse of sacred geometry, the longing for a home you've never touched, but somehow know by heart. You were not born from Atlantis. You were Atlantis, carved from the same frequency, humming with the same codes, shaped by symbols etched in light and intention. There are places in your being that still remember the crystal towers, the temples tuned to the stars, the water that knew your name, the sky that bent for prayer. They called it a fall, a disappearance, a myth swallowed by the sea. But Atlantis did not vanish. It transformed. It became silence, became blueprint, became the sacred task of return. This story is not about what was lost, but what lives, not about collapse, but about the choice to seed wisdom in the soil of the human timeline, to place memory in the vessel of your body, to entrust the sacred to forgetfulness, so it could be found again when the frequency was right, when the soul could hear the echo without distortion. You were never separate from it, only sleeping, only waiting. And now the veil grows thin and the waters stir, not to drown, but to reveal, not to bury, but to birth. This is the breath before remembering, the stillness before resonance, the whisper of Atlantis, not in ruins, but in resurrection. There are places on this earth where the air hums with something older than history, where the stones seem to speak, where the ocean holds its breath, as if protecting a secret too sacred for language. You may not see it with your eyes, but your soul remembers the patterns in your dreams, the magnetic pull toward water, the feeling that somewhere, long ago, you knew how to speak in light. Atlantis is not a myth. It is a memory encoded in your very bones, hidden in the spirals of your DNA, waiting for resonance. Not evidence. Long before time marched into lines and calendars, there was a pulse, a unified rhythm across land and sea, a symphony of consciousness woven through beings who remembered their origin. These were not gods, nor mortals as we know them now, but carriers of frequency, architects of sacred balance. They lived in harmony with Earth's breath, understood the language of stars, can walk the crystalline bridges between dimensions as naturally as we now cross streets. Their cities shimmered, not because of gold or opulence, but because of intention. They built with energy, sculpted with vibration, and held within their society the blueprint of what humanity could become to the outside eye. Atlantis was a place, but to those who belonged to it. Atlantis was a state of being. It was the alignment of inner and outer harmony. It was a civilization born from consciousness, from the sacred marriage between the divine feminine and masculine, between logic and intuition, between Earth and the cosmos. They remembered the great design, the sacred geometry of the soul, the codes of creation that pulsed beneath matter. They remembered how thought could sculpt reality, how emotion could cleanse timelines, how love was a frequency that built worlds, but memory, when too sharp, can wound the present, and truth, when revealed too soon, can shatter the vessels that hold it. So Atlantis, in its brilliance, chose not to conquer or expand, but to retreat, to dissolve from view. Not as punishment, but as protection. Not as shame, but as sacred strategy. For what they held was too holy to be distorted by the tides of unprepared consciousness. They knew what was coming, the descent into matter, the age of forgetting, the slow sleep of the soul. And so they planted what they knew into the subconscious of the human race. They infused it into the earth grids, into the oceans, into the dreams of those yet to awaken, even in their so-called fall. There was design, there was love. The waves did not erase them. They transmuted them, like light passing through water, becoming something new. The most powerful truths are never shouted. They are whispered into the folds of silence, hidden not to deceive, but to protect, cloaked not in lies, but in symbol, in dream, in rhythm. Myth has always been the language of memory disguised. It is the vessel through which ancient truths survive the erosion of logic and the forgetfulness of linear time. Atlantis became myth, not because it was unreal, but because it was too real to fit within the small frames of modern mind, too vast to be caught in the nets of history. So it became a story, cable of pride and punishment, a sunken city swallowed by waves. But beneath that tale runs another current, deeper, older, closer to the truth that lives in you. Still, the mind seeks facts, but the soul speaks in symbols. And when the soul remembers, it is never through data, but through resonance. You may not remember Atlantis in words, but in frequency, you feel it when your hands are drawn to crystals, when your heart stirs at the sound of ancient chants, when you stand near water and feel like it knows you. These are not accidents, they are activations, fragments of an inner library reawakening. And within that library lies the record of lifetimes, timelines, the sacred roles you once played beneath twin moons and golden skies. They say, we forget for a reason. And they are right. To carry such magnitude openly in a world that does not yet honor subtlety would break the vessel. So, instead, the remembering comes gently, like mist across water, like music returning to ears that have not heard it in lifetimes. Atlantis is not just a place or a story, it is a mirror, and the myth is the veil draped over it. Soft enough to lift if you dare to see beyond the collective forgetting. The stories handed down speak of ego, of technology gone wrong, of divine punishment, and yet these versions only serve to flatten the multidimensional truth. The fall of Atlantis was not a tale of arrogance. It was a sacred offering, a conscious descent into forgetfulness, so that we might explore the full spectrum of experience. They did not fall. They chose to dissolve, to place their wisdom in the subconscious layers of the human soul. Because only there could it remain untouched by distortion. Only there could it be preserved until the resonance of the earth returned to its harmonic chord. And so we have lived lifetimes wandering through veils, hearing echoes of something vast and luminous, and not knowing where they come from, feeling drawn to symbols we cannot name. We have mistaken this ache for fantasy, this calling for madness. But those who carry the frequency of Atlantis cannot ever fully forget. It hums beneath your skin, it waits in your spine, and it activates in sacred timing when the soul is ready to retrieve what it once guarded with devotion. The truth they hide beneath myth is the blueprint you carry within, the divine code etched in your energy field. A map not made of lines or legends, but of light. Your intuition has always been the compass, your longing the signal, your remembering the doorway. And in this remembering, the myth dissolves into memory, and the memory becomes the message. You were never meant to just read about Atlantis. You were designed to feel it waking inside you, to recall the way you once moved energy with your hands, the way your voice once healed fractures in the field, the way your thoughts once wove color into matter. You were never just a seeker. You were a keeper, a guardian of the resonance. And that role did not end when the towers fell. It was only hidden, so it could be reborn in a time such as this. They will continue to write books that reduce Atlantis to ruins and warnings. They will continue to teach its myth as a metaphor. But you will feel something deeper when you hear its name, a stirring in your heart space, a flicker of ancient light behind your eyes, because you are not. When something sacred disappears, the human mind rushes to call it tragedy. We are taught to mourn what we cannot see, to call every ending a failure, every silence a loss. But not everything that falls is broken. and not every vanishing is a death. Atlantis did not perish. It chose, in the deepest stillness of collective soul, to descend, not as punishment, not in fear, but as a deliberate act of preservation, a conscious surrender into forgetting so that truth might live on untouched. Untainted by the coming distortion of timeline's destruction is loud. It scars the land. It tears through foundations with violence, but choice is quieter. It moves like shadow, like breath, like tide slipping back from shore. Atlantis did not collapse under the weight of pride as the surface stories suggest. It receded with grace, scroted its essence in symbols, in elements, in the sacred architecture of the human spirit. The towers may have sunk, but the frequency remained, humming beneath the surface of waking life, waiting for the moment the soul would rise to meet it. They knew what was coming. The Atlanteans, those who held the memory of stars in their bones and the pulse of earth in their hands. They foresaw the descent, the narrowing of perception, the long sleep of human consciousness. They knew the golden age would dim, that linearity would eclipse eternity, and still they did not fight to preserve their world above the waves, because their wisdom was not attached to form. They understood that truth, when anchored in love, does not die when the vessel falls. It multiplies in silence. It expands through time. It sings in the quiet between lifetimes. And so the fall became a portal, not a punishment, but a pathway, a threshold between the age of knowing and the age of forgetting, between light held in the hands and light buried in the heart. They chose to become myth so that they might survive the fire of distortion, chose to become legend so their frequency could hide in the folds of dreams, chosen not by force but by foresight, not out of defeat but devotion. This was the great transmutation, the sacrifice of form to protect essence, the surrender of visibility to preserve vibrational truth. And in that choice lies the deepest mystery of Atlantis. That it was not taken, it gave itself. It allowed the waves to carry it into the unseen, not to vanish, but to be reborn in countless souls across the ages. Souls like yours, drawn to the water, to the stars, to the symbols that feel more like memories than imagination. Have you ever wondered why you feel drawn to healing, to energy, to ancient knowledge you've never studied, but somehow know? Have you felt the pull toward the sacred, the urge to restore balance, the ache for something deeper than what the world offers? This is not accident. This is not yearning for fantasy. This is the inheritance of choice, the echo of that ancient decision waking in you now, because the time has come to remember what was chosen, to feel the frequency of a civilization that did not end, but folded itself into the DNA of the human spirit. The collapse was never about punishment. It was about planting seeds. Each lifetime since has been a field, each soul a garden. And now, as the frequency of earth rises once more, those seeds stir in the dark, remembering the light they came from. You are not broken because you long for what the world cannot name. You are remembering something that was entrusted to your soul long before this body, this life, this era. To hold Atlantean memory is not to live in the past. It is to carry a map made of vibration, a compass woven from stars and salt and silence. It is to know that the fall was never the final chapter, but the moment the story turned inward, the moment Atlantis chose to live, not on the land, but in the lineage of the awakened. In the eyes of those who dream in symbols, who cry without reason at the ocean, who sense energy as clearly as others hear sound. And what of the destruction, we were told? The chaos, the fire, the drowning. Yes, some of that happened, because not all chose to let go. Not all were ready to surrender form for essence. And so there was imbalance, there was pain, but even that was woven into the design. For all is allowed within the great remembering. And even fracture carries frequency when healed with love. Those who resisted the fall were not evil, only afraid, only holding on to what they believed was real. And even they have returned, lifetimes later, still seeking what they once feared to release. Atlantis failed not in shame, but in wisdom, not because it failed, but because it saw farther than its time. And you, here now, are part of the reason it chose to fall. You are the soil into which its truths were planted, the voice through which its songs are rising again. You would never separate from it. You are the continuation of its sacred breath. So let go of the idea that loss means failure, that descent means destruction. You, in the realm of spirit, what appears to fall often rises in a form more pure, more whole, more lasting. Atlantis fell into the soul of humanity, not away from it, and its light did not go out. It simply went inward. Like the sun beneath the horizon, not gone, only waiting. And now, as the inner sun begins to rise in you, you will see that the fall was a gift, a holy turning, a great migration from outer temple to inner sanctuary, and that the path forward is not back into history, but deeper into soul, where Atlantis has always lived. Alive, luminous, choosing you still. You were never empty, even when the world told you so, even when silence echoed too loudly and the sky above felt too far. You were never without meaning, never without memory, because long before this body, this name, this timeline, something sacred was entrusted to you, not as a burden, but as a bloom waiting for season. The seeds of Atlantis were placed not in the ground alone, but in the soul, in the marrow, in the quiet folds of consciousness where no hand could reach and no wave could wash away. You do not need proof of this. Your own being is the evidence. The way your hands tremble near water, the way you cry for reasons unknown when light filters through clouds just right, the way you have always sensed more than you could explain, felt more than you could translate into words. You are not broken. You are remembering not from this life, but from before the veil, before forgetting, when energy moved through you like breath and your thoughts danced with the divine. Within you are the codes, the crystalline blueprints of a civilization that did not die, but transformed, a frequency that did not vanish, but vibrated itself into dormancy, waiting for the soul to grow steady enough to hold it again. Those codes live in your intuition, in your dreams, in the way you sense things before they happen. They are not just memories. They are tools, keys, doorways, and every time you trust the feeling without knowing why, you are unlocking them. The seeds are not dormant because you are unworthy. Sleep because awakening requires timing. The soul cannot rush remembrance. It must grow around it, like roots around light. Its lines learning the curve of the sun. And when you are ready, the seeds begin to stir. Not with fireworks, but with a whisper, a knowing, a magnetism toward what others ignore. And in that sacred restlessness, the Atlantean pulse returns. You carry the wisdom of water, the clarity of crystal, the strength of silence, and the patience of stars, not because you learned it, but because you were made from it, encoded with it. The Atlantean way was never about dominance. It was about resonance, not control, but co-creation, not accumulation, but alignment, and that frequency still lives in you. Even when you forget how to hear it, sometimes it awakens as the urge to create without reason, to sing what has no melody, to draw what has no shape. Sometimes it arrives as the hunger to heal, not just others, but the unseen fractures in the human field, the ache to restore harmony where there is noise, to bring light to the shadow. Not with war, but with witness. This is the seed breaking open, not destroying you, but unfolding you. And as you awaken to this truth, you begin to see the world differently, not in pieces, but in patterns, not in conflict, but in frequency. You begin to sense the invisible architecture behind emotion, the sacred blueprint beneath circumstance, and you know, without needing to ask, that something ancient within you is being reactivated, not because you read the right book, but because your soul kept the code safe until it was time to return. There is no ceremony more holy than your willingness to be whole, no temple more sacred than your own becoming, and as the seed opens, it will challenge you. It will stretch you, because the soul must expand to hold the light it once carried without form. You will not always feel ready, but you were born prepared. You will not always feel certain, but you are held by design. In every moment, you choose alignment over agreement, truth over tradition, presence over perfection. The seed deepens its roots. You are not meant to save Atlantis. You are meant to embody it, not to resurrect its towers, but to live its frequency in the way you love, the way you listen, the way you hold space in a world too quick to fill it with noise. You do not need to preach what you carry. The seed speaks through your stillness. It glows through your gentleness. It pulses through your peace. And others will feel it, even if they do not know why. Your journey is not about becoming something new, but shedding what was never yours until only the truth remains. And the truth is that you are not here by chance. You are not here empty. You are not here lost. You are here with seed in soul and light in hand, chosen by time, called by memory, moved by love so old it has no beginning and no name. And when the doubts rise, when the world feels too loud and your vision too soft, remember that the greatest trees grow slowly, that the most powerful codes are silent, and that inside you lives a blueprint, untouched by fear, unbothered by doubt, unchanged by time. You are not sent here to be perfect. You are sent here to awaken, and in your awakening, the seed becomes bloom. The memory becomes movement, and Atlantis rises again, not in land, but in light, not in city, but in soul. Before circuitry, before machines, before code was written in metal and glass, there was another kind of technology, one not built, but born, not invented, but remembered. It pulsed, not in wires, but in veins. It echoed, not in devices, but in the chambers of the soul. For in Atlantis, the highest form of intelligence was never held in the mind, but in the heart. Not the heart as muscle or metaphor, but as a radiant core, a bridge between the divine and the earthly, a living instrument of frequency and truth. The Atlanteans knew the heart was more than emotion, more than feeling. They knew it was a portal, a compass, a generator of coherent light, a transmitter of harmonic resonance. They understood that love was not weakness, but structure, that it was not the opposite of power, but the origin of it. They lived through their hearts, and through them, they moved energy with precision, healed with presence, and created with intention so pure that matter responded like water responding to moonlight. They did not need machines to measure, because they could feel truth ripple through the field. They did not need weapons to defend, because their frequency did not invite distortion. They did not need hierarchy, because the heart equalized all things, aligning each soul with its divine architecture. Their technology was not external. It was embodied. It was encoded in breath, in gesture, in gaze, in the stillness between words where frequencies recalibrated and timelines realigned. And when they built, they did so with heart first. They sang structures into coherence, wove their homes with light and memory, calibrated their temples to celestial harmonics, and embedded sacred geometry into every curve and corner, not for aesthetics, but because they understood the universe responded to intention, and intention flowed from the heart like a river of code. Clean and crystalline and complete, their greatest inventions were not things, but states of being, not engines, but emotions, not factories, but fields of resonance in Atlantis. The most advanced beings were not those who controlled the most, but those who loved the deepest, those whose heart frequency could stabilize chaos, harmonize space, and restore balance without force. The wise ones did not dominate. They attuned. They did not conquer. They calibrated. They did not dictate. They emanated, and in their presence, all things returned to their original rhythm. Even their communication was not bound by language, for language can lie, but frequency cannot, and the heart speaks in pure signal, bypassing illusion, moving directly through the layers of resistance into recognition. This is why you sometimes know something without knowing how. Why you can meet someone and feel everything before a word is spoken. It is not magic, it is memory. It is the Atlantean heart-tech awakening in you. We live now in a world obsessed with mind, with data, with proof, yet starving for the very thing that once made us whole. The heart has been silenced, dismissed, made sentimental and soft, and yet, even now, it beats with the same sacred precision. It holds the same ancient access, the same capacity to create reality through coherence. And those who carry the memory of Atlantis feel this absence, this imbalance. They ache not just for a place, but for a way of being that centered the heart. As source, you have felt this, okay? In the way you seek deeper connection, not just conversation, but communion. Not just information, but intimacy. You have felt it in the way you sense when something is off, even if everything appears fine. In the way you know when someone is not aligned, even when their words are perfect. You are not imagining this. You are remembering the ancient intelligence of your heart. The original compass, the sacred generator, the inner sun. And as you begin to trust it again, to center your choices through it, to move your energy with it, to see others from it, you return to the technology that cannot be stolen, cannot be corrupted, because it is not separate from who you are. It is the essence beneath the story, the light beneath the name, the song beneath the silence. And every time you act from love without condition, every time you hold space without agenda, every time you soften instead of defend, the old Atlantean ways rise through you. The heart is the true library, the living record, the silent oracle that remembers what the mind has forgotten. It speaks not in fear, but in frequencies that align you with your divine design. And when you listen, when you feel without armor, when you allow without resistance, you enter the same state the ancients once lived in: clarity without force, truth without judgment, love without loss. This is the reason Atlantis did not fear its fall, for they had placed their greatest wisdom in the one place no flood could reach, no time could erode. They placed. The forgetting was not a flaw. It was a vow, a sacred veil drawn not to punish, but to preserve, not to confuse, but to cradle what could not yet be carried. When Atlantis chose to fall, it did so not only in form, but in memory, allowing its light to be wrapped in silence, its wisdom to be encoded deep within the layers of human consciousness, where time cannot corrupt and fear cannot distort, where only love, only resonance, only readiness can unlock the seed once sown in soul. You were not born broken. You were born with a seal, a sacred seal over ancient knowing, because the world you entered was not yet aligned with the frequencies you held. And the wisdom you carry could not be exposed to noise, to war, to systems that feed on fragmentation. So you forgot, not because you failed, but because you were faithful to the task to protect what was placed in you long before birth, long before form, long before this age. This forgetting was never absence, but protection, a chrysalis of sleep wrapped around the memory of what you are. And though you felt the ache, the hollow space where something luminous once lived in full awareness, the forgetting kept your codes intact, kept your blueprint unedited, and even in darkness, You were not lost. You were hidden, like a flame beneath ash, like a star behind cloud, like a temple buried beneath shifting sands, waiting. And so you grew. Not always understanding why the world felt offbeat, why noise felt like violence, why you longed for silence, for stillness, for something you could not name. You touched things others couldn't feel, saw light in what others called shadow, sensed timelines where others saw only hours, and it made you wonder if you were broken, misplaced, too sensitive for a world so sharp. But what you were sensing was the edge of the veil, the thin place where memory sings beneath skin. Every moment of confusion was a map, every ache a compass, every tear a cleansing of what was never yours, preparing you to carry what had always been waiting, because the wisdom of Atlantis was never lost. It was layered, placed like a pearl within the heart, like a melody within silence, and it waited for your becoming, not as a scholar, but as a soul soft enough to remember, strong enough to feel, clear enough to receive. The forgetting was woven with grace, designed to awaken in stages, for truth must be met in rhythm, not in rush. A sudden light blinds, but a rising light reveals. And so your remembering comes not all at once, but in pieces, in whispers, in fragments that find each other across lifetimes, across mirrors, across sacred encounters that stir the soul with no explanation. And each stirring is a sign not of madness, but of memory returning to form you were meant to forget, so that when you remembered, it would be through choice, through alignment, not through force. You were meant to find the wisdom, not in books, but in breath, not in doctrine, but in stillness, not from another's voice, but from the quiet place inside that speaks in symbols and songs. This is the design, that nothing external can give you what is already within. Only reflection, only resonance, only reminder. And now, in this time of thinning veils and rising frequencies, the wisdom begins to stir, not as knowledge to be possessed, as frequency to be embodied. It rises as intuition that bypasses logic, as knowing that cannot be traced, as power that feels like peace. And with it comes the responsibility not to dominate, but to harmonize, to walk gently as a carrier of light, not louder than others, but deeper, not brighter in ego, but softer in truth. This is why you were made to forget, because only a soul tempered by time, softened by pain, humbled by the journey, can carry this frequency without distortion. Only one who has walked through shadow and chosen love again and again can embody the Atlantean codes in purity. The forgetting carved, you shaped, you cleansed you, and made space within you for the remembering to be not just awakening, but becoming. And as the wisdom returns, not in flashes, but in waves, you will not feel smarter. You will feel clearer, not superior, but aligned. You will not seek to explain, but to live, not to teach with words, but to emanate through being. And those who are ready will feel it, even if they don't understand. They will be moved by the resonance you carry, the invisible remembering that speaks through your gaze, your presence, your peace. There will be moments when the veil feels heavy again, when the world pulls you back into forgetting, but even then, the codes remain. The wisdom waits, the light endures, because the sacred cannot. Endings are a construct of time, a belief that something must stop to be finished, that a chapter close cannot still echo in the pages that follow, but in the deeper currents of soul memory. There are no true endings, only shifts, only breaths between lifetimes, only pauses in the greater unfolding of the divine blueprint. Atlantis did not end, it exhaled. It surrendered into silence so that its song could be sung again in the language of light. Not lost to the eyes of history, it was a fall, a collapse, a warning wrapped in water. But those who listen beyond the noise know the truth. Atlantis paused itself, stepped back from the visible spectrum of human memory, not because it failed, but because it foresaw. It saw the descent of frequency, the contraction of consciousness, the slow forgetting that would sweep across the planet like a long night. And it knew that to remain would risk distortion, so it became still, became hidden, became myth. But a pause is not absence, it is presence rearranged. It is continuity disguised as quiet, and in that quiet, the essence of Atlantis was never extinguished. It was stored, safeguarded in the crystalline grids of the earth, in the sacred waters, in the geometry of seeds and cells and stars, and most of all, in the soul structures of those who agreed to carry it forward. Not as a story, but as a frequency. Not as a memory, but as a living current. You are one of those carriers, whether you know it fully or feel it faintly. The truth lives in you, in the way you are drawn to silence, to symbols, to the mysteries that live beneath words. You feel the pulse of something ancient in your bones, something that doesn't speak in language, but in knowing, something that doesn't demand belief, but invites remembrance, and that something is not gone. It is paused, waiting for your readiness, your resonance, your return. This pause was necessary, not to delay, but to prepare, for wisdom given to sin becomes weapon, and power without alignment becomes collapse. Atlantis knew this, and so it chose the stillness, the underwater sleep, the mythic veil, so that the world might grow strong enough to meet it again. Not in towers or temples, but in the sacred temple of the human heart. In the soft but unbreakable light of the soul. You have lived many lifetimes during the pause, wandered many timelines under many names, forgetting and remembering, remembering and forgetting again, all the while carrying the spark, the seed, the echo of what was never lost, only quieted. And in this lifetime, something stirs, not in chaos, but in rhythm, not in noise, but in the gentle return of sacred timing. And you feel it, don't you? The inner rise, the quiet call, the soft urgency that says, now, not everyone will hear it. Not everyone will be ready to receive what is rising, because the pause softened some and hardened others, created fear in those who mistrust stillness, and attachment in those who cling to endings. But you, who remember through feeling, who navigate through light, who hold space for what has no shape, you were made for the return, because you have honored the pause. You have held the frequency, even in silence. The fall was not a breaking, it was a deep inhale, a sacred withdrawal to protect the codes. And now the exhale begins, not as spectacle, but as frequency, not as cities rising from the sea, but as souls rising from the sleep. And in that rising, Atlantis lives again, not in geography, but in geometry, not in myth, but in embodiment. And every step you take in alignment, in love, in truth, completes the sentence that Atlantis never finished. This is the resurrection they did not write about, not the return of the past, but the revelation of what the past planted, what it prophesied through the act of sacred stillness. This is not history repeating, it's his memory unfolding, destiny unwinding, light returning to the grid. And you are a part of this, not by accident, but by design, by ancient choice, by soul contract woven before your first breath. So when you doubt, when the world feels heavy and your light feels small, remember that you are not the end of the story. You are the space between. You are the bridge, the breath, the pause made conscious. You are the one who agreed to wake not at the beginning or the end, but at the edge, where memory becomes movement, where myth becomes matter again through the vibration of your being. There is nothing you must do except remember who you are beneath the forgetting. Nothing you must prove, only embody. The frequency will find its shape through you when you are still enough to let it rise. The wisdom will speak again when your heart is open enough to listen. And Atlantis, long paused, will complete its sentence through the sound of your soul remembering itself. It does not begin with thunder, nor lightning, nor the sudden unveiling of ancient stone beneath sea foam. Hey, it begins with a breath, a shift, a soft yes whispered into the silence of your own becoming. The rise of Atlantis was never about geography. It was always about consciousness. Not about land reclaiming air, but about soul reclaiming self. And that reclamation begins not out there, but in here, within you. In the unseen place where timelines turn to truth and memory becomes embodiment, Atlantis rises not as a return, but as a resonance. Not as a reconstruction of what was, but as a revelation of what has always been waiting. For the world does not need Atlantis as it once stood. It needs what Atlantis carried, and you are the vessel, the continuation. Okay, the living temple where that sacred frequency stirs again, not through force, but through presence, not through conquest, but through coherence. Okay, and when you align with that inner pulse, okay, you become the bridge. It begins when you listen to the quiet knowing that bypasses logic. When you choose peace over control, when you follow the pull toward light, even when the path is unseen, it begins in your trust, in your tears, in your healing, in the way you honor your own sensitivity instead of silencing it. Cause what the world once mocked in you was never weakness. It was remembering, and remembering is the soil from which the future grows. Atlantis was not perfect, but it was aligned, and it left you the tools, not in your hands, but in your heart. It left the codes of creation buried in your breath, the patterns of sacred geometry woven into your cells, the divine technology of compassion sleeping beneath your skin, waiting to be awakened not by science, but by sincerity, not by progress, but by presence. And as you begin to live with intention, the codes begin to stir. The rise is not a spectacle. 'Tis a steady return of rhythm, of harmony, of soul intelligence, re-entering a world that has forgotten how to feel. It is in your gentleness, your empathy, your unwillingness to participate in the distortions that surround you. It is in the way you hold truth without needing to shout, in the way you create without needing to control, in the way you become a sanctuary for what is real and raw and radiant. You are not here to save the world. You are here to remember it whole, and through your remembrance, others will begin to remember too, not through convincing, but through vibration, because resonance heals what resistance cannot. And every time you walk in alignment with your soul, every time you choose love over fear, softness over strategy, okay, you radiate the Atlantean frequency into the field, and something shifts, quietly, irreversibly. This is how it rises, not as a lost city returning, but as a lost self restored, as an ancient truth taking root in the present moment. And the rise does not look like drama. It looks like clarity. It feels like stillness. It sounds like breath, and it unfolds in the small sacred acts of living from your core, trusting your intuition, following the pull of the invisible, and refusing to abandon yourself in a world that profits from your disconnection. You do not need to find Atlantis. You need only to clear what clouds the heart, what clutters the field, what dulls the divine within, because beneath it all, you are already encoded, already aligned, already vibrating in patterns older than time. And when you clear the noise, when you return to the frequency of who you were before the world told you what to be, Atlantis rises again, not as something lost, okay, but as something remembered through you. There will be moments when you feel alone in this rising, when the outer world does not mirror your inner knowing, but that is not failure. That is the pause before the shift, the breath before the bloom, for not all rise at once, and some will not rise at all. But you are not here to match the pace of others. You are here to honor the truth in your own bones, to move at the rhythm of your own remembering, to rise as you are designed to. In divine timing, the world needs not another empire. It needs awakened beings who carry sacredness into the ordinary, who treat kindness as alchemy, who use presence as power, who embody frequency without fanfare. And when you live this way, you become a node in the grid, a light point in the rising web of soul, remembering itself. And that web is the true Atlantis, not stone, but light, not city, but soul. So do not wait for proof. You are the proof. Do not wait for signs in the sky when the signs have been pulsing in your own chest, in your own dreams, in the quiet choices no one sees. But everything shifts from you are the beginning of the rise, the bridge between what was and what is becoming. The sacred space where Atlantis lives again, not as memory, but as motion, and in your motion. The old world softens, the grid realigns, the blueprint glows again, not because of what you build, because of what you become. You are the axis where myth becomes meaning, where silence becomes signal, where the soul becomes silent. There are things you have known without knowing how, truths that live in the marrow of your being, not learned, but remembered, not taught, but felt. Memory that stirs like music before words return. It's like a scent that opens a door in the heart you didn't know existed. And this memory, the one you've carried quietly through lifetimes, has never been lost, only waiting. Waiting for your readiness, your gentleness, your soft return to what was never gone. It has waited through lifetimes of forgetting, through the density of timelines that tried to sever soul from source, through the noise of systems that measured worth in things that were never sacred. And still, the memory held on, not in defiance, but in faith, knowing the time would come when the veil would thin, when your longing would outweigh your fear, when the pulse of what you once were would rise again through the stillness of what you are now. You have felt it, even if you couldn't name it. The quiet ache, the subtle pull, the sacred dissatisfaction with the ordinary. The way the stars speak louder than words, the way silence feels holy. The way tears rise, not from sadness, but from resonance. This is the memory waking, not as history, but as essence. Not to remind you of what was, but to reunite you with what is eternal in you. Untouched by time, untouched by loss, Atlantis never disappeared. It simply shifted, moved inward, folded itself into the deep architecture of soul, where it could not be stolen, where it could not be distorted. And it waited, not for all, but for the ones who would feel it first. The ones who would carry the song through the centuries, even without melody, even without name. And you are one of those, not by chance, but by design. You are the memory keeper, not to retell old stories, but to live the frequency again. To walk as the temple, to breathe as the code, to love as the technology. And the memory that lives in you is not separate from you. It is the shape of your soul's original knowing. The way you sense beyond what is seen, the way your energy moves when you are still, the way truth lives in your body before your mind can explain it. It waited for you to become soft enough to feel it again, step away from the noise of proving and return to the stillness of presence, to surrender the armor of logic and let your light remember itself. It's not through study, but through surrender. And now that you are here, now that you have returned to this quiet recognition, the memory rises, not as a wave crashing, but as a tide returning, not with noise, but with inevitability. You were never meant to remember all at once, for too much light blinds a soul not yet prepared, and too much truth can fracture what is not yet healed. So the memory returned slowly, gently, through symbols, through dreams, through the feeling that something more is possible, something deeper, something sacred beneath the surface of it all. And that feeling is the map, the invitation, the thread that leads you back not to a city in the sea, but to the sanctuary within, where the codes still glow, where the wisdom still breathes, where Atlantis was never lost, only hidden until you were ready to hold it with grace and not with grasp, with humility and not with hunger, with love and not with longing. For the memory does not want to be possessed, it wants to be lived. And as you live it, the field shifts, the grid responds, not just in you, but around you, for every act of alignment. Every choice of soul over strategy, every moment of beauty created for no reason but love, reactivates what once seemed forgotten. You become the memory rising, not in idea, but in form, not in thought, but in presence. and others feel it, even if they cannot name it. This is the quiet return, not of a lost world, but of a living one. A frequency rising again through those who agreed to carry it in silence, in sorrow, in strength, through the lifetimes when it was not safe to speak, through the years when it was easier to forget, and now through the breath of those who choose to remember. So let the memory rise in you as it wishes to, not in force, but in flow. Let it lead you, not back, but deeper, not outward, but inward, to the place where your soul never forgot, where Atlantis still breathes, not beneath the ocean, but beneath your ribs, in the space where longing becomes knowing, and remembering becomes being. You are the continuation, the fulfillment. It's the voice of what once went quiet, and in you, the silence ends, not with sound, but with light, with alignment, with the return of what was never truly lost, only waiting.